The first time I realized America had kind of broken my brain was not in a hospital or a government office or some dramatic life crisis. It was at a German restaurant. The waiter brought the bill, and I did what every American does. My soul left my body for half a second and I started doing math. Okay, what is the tax? What is the tip? Is 20% still okay? Is 25% the new polite? Did I accidentally make eye contact too much? Is this man going to hate me forever because I rounded wrong? And my German friend just looked at me like I was defusing a bomb. She goes, Maya, the price is the price. And I know that sounds tiny. Like, calm down, girl, it's a receipt. But if you grew up in the United States, you know exactly what I mean. Americans are trained from childhood to treat normal life like a financial obstacle course. The shelf price is not the real price. The hospital bill is not the real bill. Your salary is not your take-home pay. Your college degree is not the full cost of college. Your insurance is not actually assurance. Your vacation is not guaranteed. Your sick day is a negotiation. Your childbirth recovery depends on your employer. Your ability to rent an apartment can depend on a number from a credit bureau. And the craziest part is, Americans are not walking around every day saying, wow, this is insane. A lot of us are saying, yeah, that's just adulthood. But when you leave America for a few years, especially when you live somewhere like Germany, you start seeing American life from the outside. And suddenly, things that felt completely normal back home start looking, honestly, kind of deranged. Not because Americans are deranged. I love American people. I am American. I grew up believing in the American dream. I still get weirdly emotional when I hear certain songs at a baseball game. But the system teaches people to call stress freedom. Let's start with the thing that shocks people outside America almost immediately: healthcare. In Germany, people complain about health insurance all the time. Trust me. Germans can complain professionally. It's basically cardio here. But the baseline assumption is different. If you are sick, you go to the doctor. If you need urgent care, you get care. If you lose your job, your entire medical existence does not suddenly turn into a hostage situation. In America, healthcare is tied so deeply to employment that people stay in jobs they hate because they are scared of losing insurance. And that fear is not imaginary. According to the US Census Bureau, the uninsured rate in 2024 was still 8%. That means millions of people in the richest country on earth were living without health insurance. And even if you are insured, you are not necessarily safe. That is what people abroad really struggle to understand. In many countries, insurance means the scary part is handled. In America, insurance often means the scary part has entered phase 2. Deductibles, copays, networks, prior authorizations, surprise bills, claim denials. The phrase, "is this in network?" sounds normal to Americans, but to a lot of Europeans, it sounds like asking whether the ambulance is spiritually compatible with your wallet. And the numbers are not subtle. US health spending reached about $5.3 trillion in 2024, according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That was more than $15,000 per person. OECD data also shows the United States spends far more per person on healthcare than the OECD average. So when Americans say, well, at least we don't pay European taxes, people in Europe are like, babe, you are paying. You are paying through premiums, deductibles, medical debt, employer lock-in, and the quiet fear of getting sick at the wrong time. And this is where the emotional part matters. Healthcare is not just a policy debate. It changes how you live inside your own body. In America, I knew people who waited out symptoms. People who said, let's see if it gets worse. Not because they were calm, but because they were calculating. How much is urgent care? What if they send me to the ER? What if the ER doctor is covered, but the lab is not? What if this becomes a bill I'm still paying 3 birthdays from now? The Federal Reserve found that in 2024, many lower-income adults went without medical care because they could not afford it. Even among higher-income adults, some skipped care because of cost. That is not freedom. That is a country where people are learning to negotiate with pain. And I know the counter-argument. Someone is already typing, well, America has the best doctors. Yes, America has brilliant doctors, incredible hospitals, amazing medical research. That is exactly what makes it so frustrating. The issue is not that America lacks talent. The issue is that access to that talent can feel like trying to enter an elite nightclub while bleeding. And this did not happen randomly. The American health insurance system grew around jobs, tax rules, and employer benefits. Once your healthcare is attached to your job, your boss is not just your boss anymore. Your boss is indirectly attached to your doctor, your medication, your pregnancy, your surgery, your spouse's cancer treatment. That is a lot of power for a company that still makes you use Workday. But healthcare is only the beginning, because the next thing Americans think is normal and the rest of the world finds absolutely wild is how little protected time off Americans get. When I moved to Germany, I remember hearing people talk about vacation like it was a normal part of being employed. Not a reward, not a luxury, not something you apologize for, just part of life. In the European Union, workers are entitled to at least 4 weeks of paid annual leave. In Germany, full-time workers on a 5-day week are legally entitled to at least 20 vacation days, and many people get more through contracts or collective agreements. In the UK, almost all workers are entitled to 5.6 weeks of paid holiday. Now compare that to the United States, where the Department of Labor says federal law does not require paid vacation, paid sick leave, or paid holidays. Those are generally between you and your employer, which is a very polite way of saying, good luck, babe. And Americans have adapted to this so deeply that we act grateful for 10 days off. We say things like, my company is actually pretty good. They give us 2 weeks. 2 weeks. To recover from an entire year of being alive. And even when Americans do have vacation, a lot of people are scared to use it. There is this weird moral fog around rest. If you take your full vacation, are you not a team player? If you log off completely, are you not ambitious? If you do not answer Slack from a beach towel, are you even employed? In Germany, when someone goes on vacation, they vanish. The out-of-office message is not a cute suggestion, it is a boundary. A German out-of-office email has the energy of a medieval castle gate. I am away, your message will not be forwarded. I will respond when I return. And everyone just accepts it. American out-of-office emails sound like hostage notes. Hi, I'm technically away from my desk until Friday, but I'll be checking email periodically in case anything urgent comes up. Girl, you are in labor. Put the laptop down. And speaking of labor, let's talk about having a baby in America. This is one of those topics that makes people in other countries look at you like you are describing a dystopian side quest. The United States has the Family and Medical Leave Act, which can provide eligible workers up to 12 weeks of job-protected leave. But it is unpaid, and it only applies if you meet the eligibility rules. The Department of Labor also says there is no federal law guaranteeing paid family and medical leave for private sector workers. OECD comparisons have repeatedly pointed out that the US is the only OECD country without national paid maternity leave. So an American woman can give birth, which is not exactly a casual Tuesday, and then the country basically says, congratulations, hope your employer is generous. And again, Americans have normalized it. We have baby registries with diapers, bottles, and tiny socks, but also people quietly calculating how many unpaid weeks they can survive. We have women saving PTO for childbirth, as if birth is a vacation. We have parents going back to work while still physically recovering because rent does not care that a human just exited their body. When I explain this in Germany, people ask, but how is that legal? And that question hits differently. Because Americans often ask, how can I make this work? Europeans often ask, why is your society allowed to put you in that position? That is the cultural difference in one sentence. And once the baby arrives, the next financial jump scare appears. Childcare. In America, childcare can feel like paying a second rent. Sometimes it literally is. The U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau found that families can spend a huge share of median income on full-day care for one child, with annual prices in 2022 ranging from over $6,000 to over $15,000, depending on the state and type of care. So in plain English, you can be working to afford the childcare that allows you to work. And then people wonder why birth rates fall, why parents are exhausted, why mothers leave the workforce, why families say they cannot afford another child. It is not because Americans hate children. It is because the math is rude. The American dream tells you to work hard, get married, buy a house, have kids, build a life. But then the actual system looks at that dream and says, cute. Have you considered 3 jobs in a spreadsheet? Now let's move to something that seems lighter, but says so much about American life. Tipping. Yes, tipping exists in other countries too, I know. But the scale, pressure, and emotional intensity of American tipping is different. In the US, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and the federal cash wage for tipped workers can be as low as $2.13 an hour, as long as tips bring the worker up to the regular minimum wage. If tips do not, the employer is supposed to make up the difference. Legally, someone will say, see, they still have to get minimum wage. But culturally, what happens is customers become part of the payroll system. You are not just thanking someone for good service. You are participating in whether that person can afford groceries. That creates a weird emotional economy. The customer feels pressured, the worker feels dependent, the employer gets to pay less directly, and everyone is smiling through it because the tablet has been flipped around and the lowest option is now 22%. In Germany, tipping is usually smaller and less emotionally loaded. You round up. You leave a bit extra. You do not feel like you are being asked to personally repair labor law because you ordered a latte. And Americans defend tipping because service in the US can be amazing. It can be warm, attentive, energetic. That is true. But it is also true that a lot of that warmth is produced by economic pressure. There is a difference between hospitality and survival performance. And while we are already at the cash register, let's talk about how Americans list prices before tax. This one makes visitors lose their minds. You walk into a store, something says $19.99. Then at checkout, it is not $19.99. Why? Because sales tax. And the tax depends on the state, the city, sometimes the county, and sometimes the category of product. Americans are so used to this that we just mentally add a mystery percentage and move on. But in much of Europe, the price you see already includes VAT. The number on the shelf is the number you pay. Beautiful, peaceful, emotionally mature. In America, even buying shampoo is a little quiz. And that is why I always say America is not just expensive. America is administratively exhausting. It is not only the amount of money, it is the constant calculation. Which brings me to taxes. In many countries, filing taxes is much simpler for ordinary workers because the government already has much of the information. In America, the government also has a lot of the information, but somehow millions of people still have to prove it back to the government, often through paid software. Yes, free options exist. The IRS has Free File. There have also been government-supported filing programs. But the experience for many Americans is still, choose a software, answer 80 questions, hope you did not miss a form, and if you get it wrong, that is your problem. Outside America, people hear this and go, wait, your government knows your wages, but you still have to buy software to tell them your wages? Yes. Welcome to the escape room. Now let's talk about student debt, because this one is emotionally huge. In many countries, education can still cost money. Europe is not a magical fairyland where every university hands you a free degree and a croissant. But the scale of American student debt is something else. Federal Student Aid reported that the federally managed student loan portfolio was around $1.6 trillion across tens of millions of borrower accounts. And Americans talk about this debt like weather. Yeah, I'll be paying it off forever. Yeah, I chose the cheaper school, so it's only 30 grand. Yeah, I can't buy a house yet because of loans. Normal conversation. Completely normal. But from the outside, it is strange to watch a country tell 18-year-olds that education is the path to stability, then attach a decades-long bill to the door. And debt changes your sense of possibility. It changes whether you take a lower-paying, meaningful job. It changes whether you move cities. It changes whether you start a business. It changes whether you feel like adulthood begins at 22 or at 45, after you finally defeat Sally Mae in single combat. Then there is the credit score. Other countries have credit systems. Germany has Schufa. Canada, Australia, the UK, they all have ways lenders assess risk. But the American credit score feels uniquely woven into everyday adulthood. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau explains that credit scores can affect mortgages, credit cards, auto loans, tenant screening, insurance, utilities, and cell phone service. So you can be a responsible person with a job and still have your life shaped by a number that punishes you for not borrowing enough, borrowing too much, paying late, closing accounts, opening accounts, or breathing too close to a hard inquiry. There is logic behind credit scoring. Lenders need risk assessment. Landlords want reliability. But Americans have accepted a system where being poor can make life more expensive, and then being charged more makes it harder to stop being poor. That loop is the part people outside America find insane. And then there is driving. I did not realize how much American life assumes a car until I lived somewhere with trains, trams, buses, sidewalks, bike lanes, and towns where you can buy bread without entering a highway interchange like you are joining a military convoy. In America, driving is sold as freedom. And sometimes it is. A road trip across the US can be magical. Windows down, music on, gas station snacks that are legally food but spiritually chemicals. I get it. But needing a car for basic life is not freedom. It is a subscription. The Census Bureau reported that in 2024, around 69% of US workers drove alone to work, while only a small share took public transportation. And this car dependence has history. The interstate highway system expanded massively after the 1956 law that authorized tens of billions in construction. Highways shaped where Americans lived, how suburbs grew, and how daily life was organized. But when you build a country around highways, you also build a life where children need rides everywhere. Elderly people lose independence when they stop driving. Poor people are punished with car payments and insurance costs. And your daily coffee can require a left turn across 6 lanes of traffic. In Germany, I can take a train to another city and complain that it is late. And yes, Deutsche Bahn deserves some complaints. But the fact that I can complain about a train means the train exists. In many American suburbs, if you cannot drive, you are stranded. And now we have to talk about the hardest one, guns. I grew up with school lockdown drills. Many Americans did. We learned to hide quietly in classrooms before we learned how to file taxes. And when you grow up inside that culture, you normalize it. You say, that's just how things are now. But when you explain active shooter drills to people in countries where children do not routinely rehearse hiding from gunmen, you can see their faces change. CDC data shows tens of thousands of firearm deaths in the US each year. A large share are suicides, which is important because gun violence is not only mass shootings. It is domestic violence. It is suicide. It is accidents. It is daily neighborhood violence that barely makes national news. And yes, there are counter-arguments. Gun ownership in America is tied to history, rural life, self-defense, distrust of government, identity, and the Second Amendment. I am not going to pretend this is simple. But from the outside, the insane part is not that Americans have a constitutional debate. The insane part is that the debate continues while children practice being silent in the dark. That sentence should stop everybody. And I think this is where we need to talk about the deeper pattern. Because all these things look separate: healthcare, vacation, childbirth, tips, cars, guns, taxes, student loans, credit scores, different topics, different arguments, different political camps. But underneath, there is one shared American habit. We turn public problems into private responsibilities. Healthcare is your job's problem, then your problem. Childcare is your family's problem. Paid leave is your employer's choice. Retirement is your investment strategy. College is your loan. Transportation is your car. Taxes are your software. Safety is your personal preparedness. Poverty is your budgeting failure. Burnout is your mindset issue. And because Americans are incredibly adaptable, we adapt. We make spreadsheets. We start side hustles. We meal prep. We buy planners. We finance cars. We build credit. We negotiate bills. We learn insurance codes. We save PTO for surgery. We drive 45 minutes each way. We tip 25% because we know the server is getting squeezed too. And then the world looks at us and says, why do you accept this? But that question can feel unfair, because Americans are not accepting it from a couch of luxury. They are surviving it in real time. The American dream teaches you that if you work hard, you can make it. That belief has inspired generations. It pushed people to build businesses, cross oceans, buy homes, send kids to college, take risks, reinvent themselves. That part of America is real, and it is beautiful. But the shadow side is that when everything depends on individual effort, every structural failure starts to feel like your personal failure. If you cannot afford healthcare, did you choose the wrong job? If you cannot pay student loans, did you choose the wrong major? If you cannot afford childcare, did you plan badly? If you are burned out, are you not resilient enough? If you need help, are you weak? Living in Europe did not make me hate America. It made me more protective of Americans. Because once you see another way of organizing life, you realize American stress is not inevitable. It is designed. Not always by one villain sitting in a dark room. Sometimes it is designed by history, tax codes, lobbying, court decisions, old compromises, industries built around complexity, and a culture that confuses suffering with virtue. And no, Europe is not perfect. Germany has bureaucracy that can make you want to scream into a pillow. Appointments can be slow. Housing is a mess in many cities. Taxes are higher. Salaries in some fields can be lower. Customer service can feel like you interrupted someone's deeply personal relationship with a clipboard. But the difference is the floor. In many countries, the floor is built a little higher so ordinary people do not fall as far. Paid vacation is not a luxury. Healthcare is not as tied to your boss. Parental leave is not treated like corporate kindness. Public transit is not only for people who cannot afford cars. A child's school day does not usually include rehearsing for a mass shooting. And that changes how people feel. It changes the nervous system. When basic life is less financially booby-trapped, people can breathe. They can be annoyed about normal things, like a delayed train or a neighbor who sorts recycling too loudly, instead of wondering if one medical bill will destroy 5 years of progress. So when people say, Americans think these things are normal, I always want to add, yes, but not because Americans are stupid. Americans think these things are normal because they were born into the maze. And when you are born into a maze, you do not call it a maze. Call it home. You learn the turns. You memorize the dead ends. You warn your friends about the trapdoors. You become proud of how well you navigate it. But pride in surviving a system is not proof that the system is good. And that is the uncomfortable question I keep coming back to. How much of what Americans call freedom is actually just being left alone with the bill? Because real freedom should mean more than choosing between 10 brands of cereal while being terrified of an ambulance ride. It should mean more than working through sickness to prove dedication. It should mean more than going into debt for education, debt for health, debt for transportation, debt for a chance at the life you were told hard work would give you. Real freedom should include the freedom to rest, the freedom to recover, The freedom to have a baby without financial panic. The freedom to get sick without becoming a fundraiser. The freedom to live without a car if you do not want one. The freedom to be a child in school without practicing how to hide. That is what living outside America taught me. Not that Americans are doing life wrong, but that Americans have been asked to carry things that should have been shared. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it.